I've been using this tiny lathe for about a year now. Here's some of the projects I've made with it. This bit driver was my very first project. I could tell right away that I was going to have to replace the tools that came with the tiny lathe. These pokey things were next. My improvised tools may have looked crude, but they were a vast improvement over the ones that came with the tiny lathe. I made an improved tool rest and modified some chisels for my next project. My improved tool rest allowed me to adjust it closer to the work. Here's a better look at my improved tool rest. I made it out of 1/8 inch thick angle iron. I cut down one leg to the center line of the chuck. I notched the other leg to allow for adjustment from the back. I ground down the head of this 1/4 inch bolt for clearance, and I filed 2 flats on the nut so that it would fit in the extruded base. Here are the chisels I modified. I rounded the ends of these. I turned this one into a grooving tool. And this one I made into a beading tool. Making 2 matching handles for this draw knife was a good challenge. This is the mandrel that came with the lathe. You screw it into your piece of wood and then install the shaft into the headstock chuck. I made a heavier duty version out of one of these screws. I got some practice with a cheap set of real lathe tools making this darning egg for Mrs. Magdad. My improved tool rest, screw mandrel, and tools got put to good use on Scoutcrafter's spade bit scraper and homemade screwdriver challenges. Now I feel like I can make good-looking handles for my projects. I'm only limited by the size and chucking constraints of the tiny lathe. The headstock chuck is not removable and is limited to about a 1/4 inch diameter. I was able to use a section of 1/4 inch Allen key to turn the bit driver handles, and I used a 1/4 inch bolt for my Scoutcrafter screwdriver. The tailstock is limited to this live center. I use a small center drill to prepare the blank for turning. This darning egg maxed out the tiny lathe's swing capacity. It's about 1 5/8 inches in diameter. The maximum turning length is approximately 5 inches. I found these 2 metric screws to replace the wing bolts that came with the lathe. They should allow me to increase the max length to just over 7 inches. I hope to use this extra capacity on a future project. The DC power supply has 7 speed settings. I've only used the lowest 2 on my projects. I like to mount my tiny lathe in my bench vise. It holds it securely and puts it at a comfortable height for me. Alternatively, you could C-clamp it to your workbench like this, or make a base for it. Because of the inferior tools and the poorly designed tool rest, I wouldn't recommend this tiny lathe for beginners. But if you're handy and willing to make some modifications like I did, this tiny lathe is an absolute blast. If you have one of these tiny lathes, let me know how you like it in the comments. I've included an Amazon link for the tiny lathe in the description. I've also included a link for their cheapest set of lathe tools. I got mine on clearance at Harbor Freight, but they look similar. I'm sure a real lathe is in my future, but until then, I look forward to every opportunity to put this tiny lathe to work. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Here's a playlist of all my tiny lathe projects.